Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Caitlin. I'm from grassfedgirl.com, and today we're so excited. We have Dr. Anthony Chaffee. He is a former professional athlete and also a medical doctor in Australia. Welcome, Dr. Chaffee.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's good to meet you.
Thank you again. We are just so excited. I have some questions and we want to hear your story. How did you get into this crazy carnivore diet?
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I started quite a long time ago, about 24 years ago, when I was doing my undergraduate degree at the University of Washington in Seattle. And I'd already taken botany and biology and learned about how plants defend themselves by using chemical defenses. They have about a million different defensive chemicals that they use to stay alive and to stop animals and insects from eating them. And then I was taking cancer biology, and we were learning that a lot of these toxins were also carcinogenic. Some could just kill you, and others could cause long-term inflammation and stress and damage to the body and the cells, and could eventually precipitate cancer. And we learned that just normal household fruits and vegetables like Brussels sprouts had 136 known carcinogens in them. Mushrooms had over 100, and all the different produce items, fruits and vegetables that you have ever seen all had 60, 80, over 100 known carcinogens, and they were quite abundant. They had over 1,000 times, sorry, 10,000 times more naturally occurring pesticides and insecticides, toxins that the plant makes to stop animals and insects from eating them, than the pesticides and insecticides that we spray on them by weight. And they were far more harmful. The toxins in mushrooms, for instance, were hundreds of times more likely to cause cancer in lab studies than the pesticides that were being tested against them, in this case, ALAR, in a study out of UC Berkeley from Professor Bruce Ames. So we were very taken aback by this, and we were blown away. We were looking around wildly for a TA or someone to be like laughing in the corner or trying to stifle a smile. And there wasn't any. Everyone was just as confused as I was. And so we all sort of settled down and we realized that he was serious. And I remember thinking in my head, well, but plants are still good for you though, right? And he just sort of looked at us and gave us a funny look. And I felt like he read my mind because he just said, I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you. I was like, right, forget plants. And I just cut them out and I just stopped eating them completely. I defaulted into a carnivore diet. I wasn't doing a carnivore diet because anyone told me to, or I didn't even think about it in the sense that humans have always been carnivores, been apex predators since we were humans and before we became humans because our ancestors went carnivore. And I learned that in grade school. And yet, then you're told to go home and eat your vegetables and the meat will kill you. It's very strange, but we hold these two very competing ideas in our head. It's sort of double think these two completely mutually exclusive ideas, and yet the one that holds all the evidence is the one that we disbelieve. And it's like, yes, humans are apex predators. We need meat for millions of years and it will kill you, so stop immediately. Well, why didn't it kill all of our ancestors? Why doesn't the natural diet of any animal on Earth harm that animal? It doesn't. The natural state of all life on Earth is that of health. And so when you're eating your natural, biologically appropriate diet, you're going to work in a fundamentally appropriate way, or else you're just not going to exist. The immutable law of biology is that of adaptation. Life adapts to stressors or they die. And so we've had millions of years to adapt to meat, and we've only had a few thousand years to adapt to plants. And that's only some populations. The native populations in Australia and in North America and South America largely were carnivores until they met Western civilizations and then started involving more and more Western food into their diet over the past century, century and a half. And they've been getting sicker and sicker and sicker ever since. And they actually have a far higher disease burden than other Americans and other Australians. So this is actually a very, very serious issue for our health. I felt a lot better at the time, but I didn't realize I was doing a carnivore diet. I was just not going to eat plants, and I felt absolutely fantastic for that. I've never felt better. I've never played better. I've never, performed better athletically. And then I sort of slipped off of it because some little things got slipped back in. I sort of, well, dose makes the poison. Maybe it's not that big of a deal. It is a big deal. Yeah, dose it does make the poison. The dose is really small, and so it actually affected me a lot. But you get so much inundation. Well, you have to have this plan and that. Okay, so I'll have some vegetables. Okay, I'll have some mushrooms. Okay, I'll have some salad. And I was just eating, whole meat and salad, and I just never felt the same. I never felt very good. I chalked it up to age and not being able to work out as much. I was in medical school. I was working as a doctor, just stupid hours. When I was able to work out enough, I could get back in shape, but I never felt really good doing it. And then I was 38 years old, and I came back to this and came across information. There's like, no, humans just are carnivores as a species. That's just the kind of animal we are. And that's what I was doing for those 5 years. I was living to our biological design. And that's why I felt better than I ever have. And that was the 5 years. I've always been trying to get back to those 5 years of how amazing I felt. And I could never do it. And then I said, right, I knew it. I knew plants were trying to kill me, and I just dropped it. I was only eating vegetables and lean meat because I was trying to slim down and get back into playing rugby. And I felt horrible. I had no energy. I didn't feel good athletically. I chalk that up to being 38, middle aged and all that stuff. And I, yeah, it felt horrible. And then I just dropped the greens and I started eating a lot more fatty meat. I probably quintupled my caloric intake, and I lost 23 pounds in 10 days. And I felt
Wow.
absolutely amazing. And all this junk got out of my system. All this vegetable junk got out of my system. And I felt like I was 22 again. I said, right, it's time to go play rugby. And I went back to playing professional rugby at 38. And I felt like I was 22 again, and I could just go full bore, even though I was completely out of shape. My diet was such that my body worked as well as other people who were in very good shape, because it was halfway through the season. I hadn't been playing at all. I hadn't played a full season in 3 years, and yet I was able to keep up with everybody 15 years younger than me who had been playing the whole year, and I hadn't. But I was a dead sprint the whole time. 2 weeks later, it was probably my fourth practice back, and we did a fitness test called the modified bleep test, and I came in top 5 out of 92 people, and that was all diet. I was really out of shape, and but my diet just completely carried me through. It was easy for me to push myself to that extent, and it was absolutely amazing. So at that point, I really started digging into the research, digging into literature, saying, okay, what do we know? What can we prove? And what do we still have to find out? And there's just an abundance of evidence to show that this is not only the right way to eat, but that eating outside of this can actually cause direct harm. And I started realizing this from the standpoint of a doctor, that humans are carnivores. That's the type of animal that we are, but we're not living as carnivores. We're not living to our biological design. And just like all other animals, if you, as any zookeeper will tell you, if you feed an animal something that it doesn't eat in the wild, it gets very sick. But what does it get sick with? It's obesity, heart disease, liver disease, diabetes, cancer, autoimmune diseases, arthritis, all these other sorts of things. And so that only happens when they eat the wrong diet. And that's why there's signs of the zoo say don't feed the animals. It makes them very sick if they eat the wrong thing. And that's what we're doing. And we need to put signs on our fridge saying don't eat any of this garbage, because it's going to make you very sick.
That's so interesting. What's going on with all these studies that say, you hear all the time that, antioxidants are good for you, and that there's all these studies about how plants combat cancer and other things, other diseases, and how we need, 5 fruits and vegetables a day. And, what's going on with that message? Is it more about the people who eat plants and vegetables are just having more money, and having more money makes you
Mm,
live longer? Is it, I mean, because sometimes that's like the bottom line with those things, like the vegetarians are healthier or something. What is going on with all those
mm.
studies you hear about?
Well, almost all of them are epidemiology, or nutritional epidemiology, which is inherently flawed. It's just basically the worst quality evidence out there. The medical literature is already rife with problem. It's a soft science, if you can even call it a science. I don't really. My father's a physicist. I know how science is actually done, and I look at the medical journals. I'm like, these are crap. These are just such garbage studies. You got 10 people, fed tomato soup, and fed 10 people fed onion soup. And then people with onion soup have, 0.06% less rates of cancer. It's like, yeah, I mean, you can publish that, but it's not worth anything. It's like that, but that's the type of thing, it's very low patient numbers, very underpowered, and you're not, and a lot of them aren't even experimental in that regard, right? You're not even trying to do an intervention. A lot of these things are survey studies where they say, hey, what did you eat for the last year? It's like, what? How would you know how would you remember what you ate in the last year? The nurses study, this is something that gets trotted out all the time. They have tens of thousands of nurses around America, and they said, and once a year they get an email that says, hey, what'd you eat last year? And that's it. And they have to try to regurgitate every damn meal they've had in 365 days. I mean, they don't even say, hey, can you please keep track of the meals that you have going forward? This is a multi-year study, but they're always asking the retrospective question, hey, what did you eat? How the hell would people know if they're not keeping track? I mean, you're just not going to do that. So it's inherently flawed, and it's flawed on purpose so that they can manipulate the data to come up with any outcome that they want, saying that, oh, eating red meat is causes type 2 diabetes. Well, no, it can't show causation from an associative study, first of all, and these things are just completely backwards and nonsensical because of the reasons that we mentioned. So epidemiology has a lot of confounding factors as well. You have all these sorts of different things that come into play and could be at fault, and others that just have an. Oh, hold on. Sorry, don't know what happened there. Oh, sorry, I don't know why my camera just died. You have all these sorts of associations that may not have anything to do with anything else. There's an association between ice cream sales and shark attacks. Does that mean that sharks just like,
Right.
fat, sweet ice cream covered children? Or is that because, people buy more ice cream in the summer when it's hot and you go swimming in the water where there's sharks, right? That's an association. There's no causative link between that, but there is an association. So you can draw a lot of associations, but and they try to vilify meat in a lot of different ways, and one of those ways is by just being fraudulent, flatly fraudulent. They try to say, well, things that have an ingredient that is meat, we'll count that as a meat. So pizza sometimes has toppings that are meat toppings. So pizza counts as meat. So if you eat pizza, if you say you ate pizza, that counts as meat. Or lasagna, or sandwiches, or fast food, right? So just because there's one burger patty, there's one meat patty in there with two buns, a bunch of lettuce, tomatoes, sugary sauces, trans fat, deep fried, seed oil deep fried uh, vegetables and potatoes, and a sugary drink, that's meat. That's the only thing that's there. That's meat. The only thing that counts in there is meat. I mean, it's just nonsense. So then there's healthy user bias. So you have people of higher socioeconomic status, people that smoke less, they drink less, they exercise more, they avoid other sorts of things. So is it that people are healthier because they eat more fruits and vegetables, or is it that healthy people tend to eat more fruits and vegetables because they're told it's healthy, right? And that's actually what you find is that it's that way around. It's not because the fruits and vegetables are making them healthy, it's because they're making healthier choices all around. And they're comparing this to people eating a standard processed food diet, junk food diet. Now, 75 to 80% of the standard American diet is plant-based. We're already eating a plant-based diet as a population. It's just that those plants are processed plants. It's largely processed plants, refined grains, refined sugars, and seed oils, and these sorts of things. And so going to a more whole food approach, you're getting rid of a lot of that junk food, but you're getting rid of plant junk food. And so you say, oh, if you eat more fruits and vegetables, is that good? Oh, well, yes, that's associated with better health. Okay, but you're replacing what? Are you replacing meat? Right? So what are you comparing your populations to? Or is it replacing, for me, populations of carnivores where we're only eating meat, and now you're eating more fruits and vegetables? Does that help outcomes? No, we've never done that study. So we have no idea one way. I mean, I have an idea, but we don't have any we don't have any studies that say one way or the other. Um, so you can't say that, but that's what they say. They say, well, if you eat more fruits and vegetables, you get better. Compared to what? It's always compared to what? Like any economist will tell you, compared to what? Was like, oh, well, this price changed. Compared to what? Like everything is compared to something else. Um, the other thing too is that when you when you look at these sort of associations, like so there's a study that someone tried to throw at me. Actually, like Lane Norton tried to say, it's just like, well, these plant toxins are actually good for you. And so, like, oh, okay. And he said that he had a randomized control trial. It wasn't a randomized control trial. It was a systematic review of epidemiology. And one of those epidemiological trials was a survey study again of people who had survived a heart attack. So we don't know how many people died of a heart attack, but just the people that survived down in Costa Rica. And they stratified them out between how much vegetables they ate or whatever. And they said that, four categories, and the people who ate the most leafy greens, they had the least amount of heart attacks out of the go, or they survived the least amount of heart attacks, or maybe just more of them died. Who knows? But either way, in that study, the ones who filled out the study, less of them had were in the higher vegetable eating group. But then you look down at the other things that they asked, which was how much sugar did you eat? How many total calories do you eat? Socioeconomic status, diabetes rates, smoking rates. The people that ate more vegetables were all in positive ends of that, right? So that's healthy user bias, right? They're eating 800 less calories on average. They're eating far less sugar on average. They smoked far less on average. They had less diabetes on average. They had higher socioeconomic status on average. And so you can't just say that vegetables are good. Now, one good thing that this study did, which was it looked at some of the plant toxins that are in there called isothiocyanates. And these are known toxins. They're classified as toxins, and we already know they're toxins because our bodies try to detoxify them. Our liver has an enzymatic system that that tries to detoxify these things, break them down so they can eliminate them out of our body and remove them from the premises. So if your body acts like that to something, your body is responding to it as a toxin by trying to detoxify it. So that's a pretty safe bet that that's not something you necessarily want in your body unless you're using for a medicinal purpose, which is what a medicine is. It's a poison that just under certain circumstances helps more than it harms for that circumstance, but you're never going to take a random medication just because in some circumstances it helps. You're not going to take digitalis because it can help with heart failure unless you have heart failure. You shouldn't take chemotherapy unless you have a cancer for which that chemotherapy agent is useful. Right? So they say, well, all these plants are really good against cancer. Okay, do you have cancer? No. Then why the hell are you taking chemo? That's not a good idea. So these isothiocyanates in the study that he tried to throw at me to say that these plant toxins are good for you, it actually showed that there were 20% of these people that ate more plants that had a gene that made it less efficient for them to break down these toxins and eliminate them out of the body. So they had higher levels in their blood for longer, right? And they found that in that population, they actually had more heart attacks than the people that cleared out the toxins, right? So there's that association. So there's associated eating more fruits or more vegetables in this case was associated with better outcomes. But there are all these other reasons for those better outcomes. And in fact, the at least the isothiocyanates, that are the toxins in that plant that they say, oh, these are good for you, were actually bad for you. When you actually looked at those individually, those were harmful. They caused harm potentially. They're associated with more harm. So that's the thing. You have to sort of dig through these, and that's all these different associations, all these different confounding factors. They're not they're not high level. They're
It's
not interventional trials. The only study that's really been studied at a high level with interventional trials, randomized controlled trials, is a ketogenic diet. We have thousands of studies on a ketogenic diet. What's a ketogenic diet? You take away all carbs and sugar. Well, what do you replace that with? Meat, protein, and fat. Well, do you do that from plants? No, it's almost impossible to do that. You could, but none of the studies do. So what do they replace it with? They replace it with animal protein and animal fat. So it's a high fat, high animal fat, high saturated fat, and high animal protein diet. So it's a whole food, meat based, high fat, animal fat diet with a side salad, right? That's that's a carnivore diet light. It's carnivore light, carnivore with a side salad. That is the most rigorously studied diet on earth that has shown the most beneficial health outcomes for specific health markers and endpoints, like reversing type 2 diabetes, like reversing autoimmunity, like improving Alzheimer's disease and dementia. So that is the only study that really helps. But um, and just removing processed crap. But there's no product at the end of that, right? So the drug companies, the food companies push these other, and it's the food companies that make most of these studies. So that's the other thing too. These things are just, they're made by the wrong people. They're being paid for by Pepsi and Nestle and Coca-Cola. They spend the vast majority of money on nutritional research studies to basically support their products, because it's all plant-based products, and they know that if you go plant-based, you don't go raw food vegan. You go maybe for a time, but really what you end up doing is eating a bunch of processed foods and crap.
Oreo.
And that's yeah, exactly. And Oreo cookies are vegan, right? Not everybody knows that. And there are Oreo cookie vegans out there, and that eat a bunch of that sort of stuff. And that's what they know. So they're trying to vilify meat so that they can push their own garbage onto the rest of the world. There is no product at the end of the line for a ketogenic diet. It just works. It just actually helps people. And so while the pharmaceutical companies support this too, because these foods are making us sick, they're making us metabolically unwell, and they get to sell us trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars worth of medicine worldwide. It's estimated that we're going to be spending over $13 trillion a year just treating the top 5 non-communicable diseases, such as cardiovascular disease, pulmonary respiratory sort of diseases, cancers, mental health issues, and type 2 diabetes, right? So just those, just that's not even autoimmunity and all the other sort of things, Alzheimer's and dementia and all these sorts of things. Massive, massive money. Just $13 trillion just on those 5, right? And we're going to be losing $46 trillion in opportunity costs and lost wages and sick days and lost productivity between 2010 and 2030. And these are all numbers from Harvard School of Public Health, by the way. And in 2010, 2011, we lost about $22 trillion worldwide in just excess deaths and premature deaths. And then in 2030, that's expected to go over $40 trillion. So we're losing, you know, 10, 20, 30, $40 trillion a year in opportunity costs and lives lost. And we're also spending $13 trillion a year to pay for all the medicines to treat these sorts of things. And we're still dying, and we're still getting sick and losing things.
They're losing customers.
Well, yeah, well, I mean, they are and they aren't, because the thing is that if we're not sick in the first place, they don't have any customers. And it's just like the smoking tobacco companies is like, yeah, their people are dying, so they need to hook people younger. And so they're trying to get people, they're trying to get, people on more and more drugs younger and younger and younger. Say, yes, well, you need to be on statin since birth or something like that. It's just like they don't say that, but they're saying all these sorts of things that just younger and younger and younger, that you have to be on all these medications. And so they're making $13 trillion a year, but it's costing the rest of us, 40, 50, 60 trillion dollars a year in lives lost and opportunity costs, right? And we're paying this $13 trillion. So they're making 13 trillion, but it's costing the world many times that in lives lost and opportunity costs and things like that, and just people being sick and not being able to enjoy their lives. So that's a really bad bargain. And but at the same time, they're getting $13 trillion a year, and they are not looking to give that up. And so they're the ones they're paying for conferences, they're paying for wings in hospitals, they're paying for medical schools, they're paying for all these sorts of things in order to keep that curriculum and funding in the direction of perpetuating the status quo.
Yeah,
And
that's it.
there's no counter to that. They're sending in drug reps to say, yeah, here's the epidemiological study that says blah blah blah, and our study's good, and this that, and the other. Diabetics patients, no, you don't have to lower their um, blood sugar by lowering their carbohydrate intake. Just make sure they get enough insulin. Well, you sell the insulin, so I'm like, why am I taking your word for that? And
I have a close family member who recently had a heart attack, and uh, one of the drugs they wanted to use was Jardiance. And
mhm.
I thought that was so ironic because they don't say anything about reducing sugar, but
Mm,
they only harp on saturated fat. And then they say, well, but we found this drug is really helpful for getting sugar out of the blood and it helps heart
hmm
patients, even though it's like a diabetes drug. And I was just like, what? And uh, it was so funny because, all the things are just saturated fat, avoid, and then just say eat healthy. Like that's some blanket statement. I mean, they don't give any real guidance because they don't really know what to say. And, how do you get somebody who's kind of afraid because they've had maybe a heart problem or they've been told they're heading down that direction and all they hear is cut saturated fat? How do you get them over the hump to to a carnivore or ketogenic diet?
Well, you just have to point out all the things that we talked about here, and point out that saturated fat, cholesterol, and meat were falsely vilified. There were no serious scientists who independently came up with the idea that cholesterol caused heart disease. That was a complete invention of the sugar companies, the processed food companies, who then went out and bought scientists and researchers to say that it was. And it's not me saying this, that's them saying this. So the Sugar Research Foundation paid off 3 Harvard professors to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol caused heart disease when it was really sugar, and to exonerate sugar and say that it was safe. And one of those professors was named head of the USDA, and he was the one who authored and published the USDA declaration saying that cholesterol caused heart disease. And we have their own memos on this. We have their memos detailing how they paid off Ansel Keys and many other sort of people, and that they were pushing this from the beginning. And that was, and some of those have been published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, in 2016. So that's a matter of record. That's a historical fact. And so we just, you throw that out, you know that these things are predicated on a false pretense. You have to throw that out and start over. You can't build off of that house of cards. It's just you just have to topple it and start over again. And the reason they did that is because there were serious scientists who independently came up with the idea that sugar, refined sugar, and processed foods were the cause of cardiovascular disease, because cardiovascular disease was a very new disease in the 20th century. It did not really exist in any real degree before the 20th century. The first death from heart attack proven on autopsy in America was in 1912.
Wow.
And there was no recorded death from heart attack in America or the colonies before that. There were a scattering of deaths from heart attack reported on autopsy throughout Europe in the 1800s, and one in the 1700s that I've found. And just obscure sort of references saying, like, at a conference, going like, oh, we found this thrombus in the coronary vessel. Isn't that weird? Never seen that before. And then 10 years after that first heart attack in America started becoming more prevalent in the 1920s. And then in the 1930s, it becomes the #1 killer in America. Why is that? I mean, where is that coming from? We were eating more meat and animal fats in the 1800s than we were in the 1920s and 1930s, when this became the #1 killer. In fact, the 1920s and 30s was at a trough, a sort of a U-shaped curve from the early 1800s to the end of the 20th century, where the bottom of that, the very bottom, the least amount of meat that Americans were eating in 200 years, was in the 1920s and 30s, when this became the #1 killer in America. So how the hell can that be? If meat is a causative factor for heart disease, and saturated fat is a causative factor for heart disease. Also, saturated fat rates have been pretty steady throughout the 20th century and today, and yet heart disease has gone up. So there's no association there. There's no association with meat, right? Because in the 1800s, there were no heart attacks. People could see some atherosclerosis that had been described for a few hundred years here and there, but we knew that it's abnormal, because normal cardiac arteries, coronary vessels, were not filled with plaque. And every now and then we're like, oh, look at that. That's weird. Isn't that strange? Because that was abnormal. You have to know what's normal before you know what's abnormal. And in fact, it was a good demonstration of this when I was in medical school. There are a lot of uh, very famous doctors, and with a lot of different pathologies named after them, from Dublin. in the 1800s, late 1800s, and that was part of the UK at that point. And and that was a mecca for medicine in Europe at the time. And so a lot of things came out of that area at that time. And there was one doctor who found out everyone's burning coal and all that sort of stuff. There's all this black smog and all that sort of stuff. So they're doing all these dissections on people from the city because that's where the population density is. And they're doing these autopsies. They're doing tons and tons of autopsies and dissections because that's just what you did. And then all of a sudden they got this guy in from the country, and he did an autopsy, and he was just like, oh my God, look, his lungs are all pink. Normally they're black. This is weird, right? So he thought that lungs are supposed to be black because those are all the lungs that he's seen. And so he like published this and described his pink lung disease. He thinks something caused his lungs to get pink and like killed this guy. Right. And so, my professors just said, you never want to be the guy who discovers pink lung disease. Be very careful about that. So, the thing was is that they did describe atherosclerosis, but it wasn't like, oh, this is what's normal, and oh, look at this. It's like, just with these weird looking vessels that don't have this spongy plaque in it. No, they knew that was the majority of people didn't have the plaque in it. And then every now and then they saw a bit of plaque, but they never saw these thrombi, right? Except for isolated occurrences throughout Europe, a handful of these things. Going back to Da Vinci and Dr. Harvey, who described the circulatory system, they did thousands and thousands and thousands of autopsies. They never saw thrombus in the coronary vessels and a big dead, scarred down, ruptured part of the heart, right? Which is what you get in these massive heart attacks. It's very visibly clear, what happens, because it's not the blockage that kills you, it's the damage to the heart wall. And then usually that will thin out, scar out, and could possibly rupture and all these sorts of things. And that's or the scar screws with the electricity and you end up getting an arrhythmia and you die from the arrhythmia. But you see the scar, or you'd see the rupture and all these sorts of things. They don't see that. If you look at the medical textbooks in the 1800s, they're very detailed and about the pathologies of the heart, the dissections, things that you see, the coronary vessels, and all the different chambers, all these different things that you see. That is not described. I have one of the foremost medical educators, William Osler's, Sir William Osler's textbook that was my great grandfather's from the 1800s, and it does not describe thrombi in the coronary vessels. It does not describe scarred down, ruptured heart walls for some reason. It does not describe that, and so that was not seen in that era, right? But people could see them. They found these isolated specimens, and they were doing tons of autopsies, tons and tons and tons of autopsies. So they could see that. And Dr. Harvey, who described the circulatory system back in what was the 1500s, he he saw some of these little plaques and things like that, saw them to be abnormal, but again, never found a bunch of heart attacks and deaths from heart attacks and things like that. This is a brand new disease, Alzheimer's disease. That was named after Dr. Alzheimer's, right? There weren't any cases of Alzheimer's dementia anywhere in the literature before that, which is why he got his name on it, right? That was in 1906. He had a single case report of one woman who had this very strange presentation of neurocognitive decline that then became coined as Alzheimer's dementia. It was not seen anywhere before that. Why is that? Well, it's because people weren't living long. No, that's not true. The average life expectancy from birth was lower, but that's because most people died in infancy and at young age. When the infant mortality rate went up, or infant mortality rate went down, then the life expectancy went up. But when you got to adulthood, you lived as long as we do now, if not longer.
Oh.
And so, yes, there were old people. My great grandfather, whose medical textbook from Osler, Sir Osler, I have, he was born in 1875. He died in 1975 at home without dementia. He was 100 years old. His father was nearly the same when he died. And
My
yeah,
grandmother is 102, and
nice.
she grew up on a farm, and she didn't have vegetable oil until she went to the city when she was like 22.
Mm,
And
yeah,
I
good for
think
her.
that, helps.
It definitely did. Yeah.
Um, So a lot of people have, they come into the carnivore diet because they want to have weight loss. And, what do you tell people who have like they've done it maybe a little while and they're having just weight loss stalls?
Yeah. Well, there can be a lot of reasons for that. Sometimes they're not quite fully on a carnivore diet. Sometimes they're eating just a lot more meat, but they haven't cut out all the other things, especially sweets or non-sugar sweeteners, the artificial sweeteners, stevias and monk fruit sugar and things like that. Those are classic weight loss stalls and on a carnivore diet. And also, dairy is a classic weight loss stall. So, people eating tons of yogurt or milk or cheese, lots of cheese, things like that. That can just you can end up eating more than you may need, and it can stall your weight loss that way. Sometimes undereating can be a problem too. If you're chronically undereating, you will actually slow your metabolism, your metabolic rate down. There's a show called The Biggest Loser where where there's the classic, two lima beans and a celery stalk a day, and then just kill yourself on a treadmill, and this is how you lose weight. And they did lose weight, and it was miserable, and they hated it, and most people gained their weight back. But what they checked their metabolic rate, and it was destroyed after the show. It just absolutely destroyed their metabolic rate. And then they checked them 6 years later, most of them regained the weight, and their metabolic rate was still destroyed, right? So if you're chronically undereating, you're doing that sort of dieting, you're going to lower your metabolic rate. In fact, bariatric surgeons will tell their patients, hey, you need to eat enough, because if you don't eat enough, you won't lose weight. So if you, what they say for women, it's at least one bariatric surgeon I was talking to said for women, if they eat less than 1,200 calories, they won't lose weight. For men, it's under 1,400 calories, they won't lose weight, right? So that's just your metabolic system going down. And so you want to encourage your metabolism. You don't want to lower your metabolism. So you want to eat your what your body wants. If you're only eating meat, if you're eating other things, if you're eating a lot of dairy, if you're eating carbs, that will derange your hunger signals, and you can eat too much. But if
Uh,
you're only eating meat, you tend to self-limit.
do you have an idea? I mean, when you tell people like maybe a starting calorie range on
Mm.
a carnivore diet, or maybe one
It's
for men or one for women, or
No, it's very individual, and so it depends on your metabolic rate, and do you need to lose weight? Do you need to gain weight? How unwell are you? All these sorts of things. Basically, you want to eat until fatty meat stops tasting good. If you are only eating fatty meat and you're not on medications like um, corticosteroids like prednisone, prednisolone, hydrocortisone, those sorts of things, those will absolutely smash up your hunger. If you're not taking any of those and you're just eating meat and water, then almost everybody can just eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good, and your body will just tell you when it wants you to stop. All animals in the wild are able to eat intuitively. No one has a coach to tell them in the wild. I've never seen a koala pull out a calculator to figure out its macros, right? It just eats, and then something inside of it tells it to stop eating. And you don't get obesity, you don't get illness in the wild when animals are just eating what they're supposed to eat. So if we're eating what we're supposed to eat, those same laws should apply. And somehow we've made it without all these diet coaches telling you how to structure your macros and things like that up until very recently. And how's that going? We've become the fattest and sickest we've ever been in human history, and that's when we had the most amount of diet coaches and people telling us how to structure our meals, and the most amount of studies on what to eat and how to eat, and I'll do all that sort of nonsense. If you want to know about nutrition, you look at what animals eat in the wild. There are no studies testing koalas and panda bears and leopards on maybe they should eat this, and maybe they should have the DASH diet, or maybe they should go vegan. There's none of that. They
yeah.
look at what they eat in the wild, they feed them that, and they're fine. They feed them outside of that, they get sick. They're not fine. So that's how humans should do this too. What do humans eat in the wild when they're able to get it? They eat meat. What have we been eating for millions of years? We've been eating meat. And it wasn't until agriculture that people started getting sicker. And we see that in the fossil record. Immediately before and after agriculture, we dropped by 5 inches. Our brains got smaller by 11% for men, by 17% for women. That dropped immediately and has persisted until today. Didn't take hundreds of years. It was right away. and our jaws became smaller, teeth became more crowded, crooked, fallen dental arches, cavities, infectious disease, and signs of poor wound healing, and all these other sorts of problems. People got shorter and sicker and dumber since the advent of agriculture. And we saw this in real time with Native Americans and Native Australians. There's a study in 2001 that showed that the Plains Indians eating just bison, American buffalo, that they were the tallest population of humans alive on Earth at the time.
Wow.
And then they, you know, you know, the buffalo herds got wiped out, and they were forced to eat more agrarian food, and they are not anymore. And so they shrunk immediately. They saw the exact same disparities pre and post agriculture that we see in the fossil record, because that's what happened to them. They were pre-agricultural, now they're post-agriculture, and they're far more sick than other Americans, because European Americans and people from other cultures that have had cultivated crops longer, they've had time to build up some resistances to these plant toxins and this inappropriate food. But the Native Americans, Native Australians, it was 100 years ago. That's just not enough time. And so they get far more unwell eating the exact same stuff, right? But everybody gets sick. It's just at, at a faster or slower rate. We see this with other populations, such as the Maasai in Africa. They have their neighbors, the Akikuyu, who they're both, primitive tribes, and yet the Maasai eat mostly meat, milk, and blood, and the Akikuyu eat more vegetarian, plant-based diet, a lot of grains and things like that, and the women eat more leafy greens. And if you look back in the 1920s, there was a large study done by the British. They found the exact same disparities between the Maasai and the Akikuyu that we see pre and post agriculture. The Maasai men were on average 5 inches taller, 23 pounds heavier of lean body mass, 50% stronger, had far less disease, certainly no chronic disease, way less infectious disease, better teeth and dentition, far better nutritional status. Akikuyu were very nutritionally depleted and deficient in a lot of ways. Even when they supplemented their nutrients for the Akikuyu, they still didn't get better. They didn't get less diseases and infectious diseases. It wasn't until they replaced the plants with meat that they actually started improving their health and all these sorts of things. And then, as you see throughout the 20th century, when the Maasai started eating more and more plants and more millet seeds, and more Western food started coming in, they started getting more sick. They started seeing heart disease in very low rates, but they started seeing some in the 1970s, and now they're having high rates of diabetes and other sorts of things in the populations that are eating Western junk food. There's Coca-Cola trucks that come into these Maasai villages, and they sell out in 15 minutes because they don't know how poisonous this stuff is. And Dr. Mark Hyben did a video on this. He's a doctor over at Cleveland Clinic, and he was on a research trip out to the Maasai, and he saw this Coca-Cola truck come in, and he was horrified. He went to the chief and said, "Hey, that stuff's actually really bad. It can, cause obesity and diabetes and all the other sorts of things." And the chief was like, "Whoa, hold on a second. We actually have a real big problem with diabetes. You think that's part of it?" And he's like, "Yeah, I think that's definitely a contribution." And so, but they don't know. They're just preying on these people that have no idea.
It's
And
funny.
so,
Sounds
and
like
and now they're getting sick.
how they send in those people with the formula and stuff to
Oh,
tell
dude,
them.
yeah. That was evil. That was pure evil. If people don't know that, that was Nestle, and they sent people out with formula telling people that this is the best nutrition. Scientists figured out that this was the best nutrition for your baby. You know what figured out what's the best nutrition? Nature and God. That's what figured that out. Just breast milk. I mean, why the hell would anything else be better than that? If the mother's eating a healthy diet, which really should just be meat, then the breast milk's going to have absolutely everything that it needs and nothing else. And so they said, "Oh no, this is made by scientists. It's science diet." And we have dog food called science diet, and it's making dogs sick too, and that's hurting them as well. They're all getting the same diseases we get, these human diseases. It's just like, well, what the hell is a human disease? Diabetes, heart disease, cancer, lupus, feline lupus, all these sorts of things. They don't get that if you don't feed them this crap. If you feed them meat, they don't get these diseases. They just don't. And so, yeah, so Nestle went out and started pushing that to these impoverished areas around the world, in Africa and elsewhere, and saying that this is the best thing you could do if you love your kids. This is what you'll buy. And these people,
They don't
desperately
have any
poor.
money. Yeah.
Yeah, and so they're spending what little they have on this formula, and then they run out, and now they're dependent because the mom has run out of her milk has dried up, and so she's not producing milk. So they can't feed the baby now, and they can't afford the formula. And so what did they do? They just watered it out so they could give them more bottles, but wasn't enough nutrition, there wasn't enough energy in it, and
Yeah.
these babies were dying all around the world. It was truly sick what
Yeah.
these
I
people
mean, I
did.
was breastfeeding for 3 years and but mainly, I mean, one of the big reasons was because I'm too cheap. I'm not gonna buy
Yeah.
formula. I mean,
Oh,
I
good.
know, of course I know what's in it too, but
Hmm.
I was like, I'm not buying it's like $40 a week or something. It's insane. I mean, that's like $200
Hmm.
a month. I mean, that's crazy. But of
Right.
course, I mean, it was hard for me to stop actually breastfeeding. I didn't even know how to stop. I was like,
Mm.
don't where's the handbook on
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they
All
love
right.
it
All right.
so.
Get away. Yeah.
My son loved it so much and yeah, it was pretty easy for us, but I had a lot of support. If you don't have support around you to get started, it's really difficult to get started
Hmm.
if you have all your doctor and everybody saying, "Oh, um it's not going to work and just
Hmm.
get supplement with formula and because it is painful at the beginning to get it going and like your body's all it's like a weird thing to get started.
Hmm.
But then after a month or so, it's easy. So, but you have to get over that hump. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
now he's 3 and he's 50 pounds. So,
yeah, great. Well, I
uh,
was gonna say too, just on the formula side of things, I was just talking to a lady and she's of Inuit descent, so she's Canadian First Nation people, and so she's very active in that community. She's been carnivore for most of her life because that's just a cultural thing. They just eat a lot of meat, and her daughter had a lot of health problems and childhood epilepsy, and they found that that eating anything besides just meat, she would just get seizures and health problems. So they're just like, okay, so they're just eating meat the whole time. And then and so I become acquainted with her and was talking to her about these sorts of things, and we were talking the other day, and she said that there's this it's a wave of seizures and epilepsy in the Inuit kids now in very northern Canada where they are, and it's just after weaning. As soon as they get off breast milk, these kids are just having seizures and having seizures. And so I asked her, I was like, well, what are they weaning onto? Because that sounds like, that might be the problem because, all these formulas have tons of sugar and carbs and seed oils and things like that, may not be good for them. And then the baby food sort of, nasty little, mushed peas and stuff like that. I mean, they taste disgusting. So they add a bunch of sugar to it generally. And
uh,
so, I was like, what are they being weaned onto? And she said, as soon as you said it, like I knew it because there's actually apparently what she was saying. I didn't verify this. I didn't check on it, but she said that it's now required that people in that community go to formula after they finish breastfeeding. They have to go to formula. So they're actually like the Canadian government or something is requiring them to go on to formula.
probably
And now
they probably give it to them for
could
free.
be, but it's yeah, I don't know, some sort of backdoor deal with Nestle or one of the other food manufacturers. But they're required to do this. They're required to go on this stuff, and now all these kids are getting seizures. And so the again the Native Americans, the Inuits have been eating meat up until very recently. A lot of them still traditionally eat a lot of meat, but they start including all these other things in it. They are going to be much more sensitive to
Mhm.
these things, to the sugars and seed oils and agricultural food, because they just haven't been exposed to it. And so they haven't any built up defenses. In fact, she's been eating just carnivore most of her life. She's 60 now. She looks like she's 35.
Uh,
And the only difference is that she'd have spices. She would use a lot of spices and seasonings on the meat that she eats. And she actually had a number of autoimmune diseases. And then she came across my work saying, hey, if you just get rid of absolutely everything, these plant toxins are not your friend, that generally people do better. And she was just like, how can that be? There's no way that my autoimmunity is coming from these spices that I'm using. So, but she was like, you know what? Screw it. I'll try it. Go for 30 days. and she just cut out the spices for 30 days. They all went away. Just
Wow.
everything just went away. And so now she's like, damn it. All right. So now her autoimmune issues are gone and she doesn't use spices anymore. So that's how sensitive some people are. That's how sensitive generally the native populations who have been eating meat up until what, last week. That's how sensitive they are. And so now you're putting babies on this formula is highly processed, full of just absolute, just high octane garbage, and they're getting seizures. I mean, how can you do that to a child? When you have a seizure that is so damaging to the brain, you can get permanent damage to the brain. You can die. And so it is absolutely unconscionable to force people to do something that would cause seizures in their kids. And I mean, we're just so backwards right now, and there's so many reasons for that. All the financial reasons, through even ideological reasons. Like the Seventh-day Adventist Church has been pushing since the 1800s for people to stop eating meat because it's a sin to God to eat meat because it causes lustful feelings. That's what they think. It causes you to masturbate and things like that. Kellogg's cereals was founded by a Seventh-day Adventist, John Harvey Kellogg. Dr. Kellogg, very famous doctor in America. Presidents went to him, Rockefeller went to him, Carnegie went to him, Henry Ford went to him, a very famous guy. And he was pushing this hard, and he was not secret about it. He said that he was, starting Kellogg cereals to suppress sexual urges and things like that. And so they founded the processed food industry to try to replace meat and suppress sexual urges. That was their MO.
No,
Uh,
that
I'm
was
a
the
big,
whole people who came to this country, was those kind of people, that wanted
mm,
those really fundamentalists that started America,
well,
it's
there's
like
that,
because they
yeah.
wanted the religious freedom to,
Mm.
suppress,
And if you want to,
carnal
yeah,
knowledge or whatever.
yeah. Well, if you want to do that to yourself, that's your business. But you don't get to force that on other people.
Mm.
And then you have this entire industry that is brought about because of that. And now it's a multi-trillion-dollar a year industry. And now it's just a
Yeah.
monster on the loose at that point, because now it's got its own vested interests in perpetuating itself, whether or not they want you to stop masturbating or not. Now they just want to make money. But those interests are still there. The Seventh Day Adventists, Dan Buettner, who did the Blue Zone studies and said, oh, if you eat less meat and more plants, you live longer. Bullshit. All those places actually ate a lot more meat than he said they did, and most of the time they ate a lot more meat than the average person did. And except maybe the Seventh Day Adventists, who they looked at in Loma Linda, but they didn't compare. They didn't look at the Mormons, who actually live as long or longer than the Seventh Day Adventists, and they don't have the same dietary restrictions. And also the Seventh Day Adventists, they don't all eat a vegetarian diet. It's only a few of them that do that. That's just the doctrines that they push on people, but they don't necessarily do it. It's just some of them do, and it's just encouraged, and they say it's a good thing. But Dan Buettner is a Seventh Day Adventist, and then
Uh,
he sold the Blue Zone study, the being able to call yourself just basically that name. He sold the rights to that to the Seventh Day Adventist Church for something like $70 million,
oh,
right? So, now they're pushing all that nonsense,
really
making
an
Netflix
agenda.
specials. Yeah, exactly. And, they founded, Dr. Pritikin, who had the heart health diet of just low fat, no fat, all that sort of stuff. He's the father of the plant-based diet. He was a professor at the Seventh-day Adventist private medical school at Loma Linda, that you have to be a Seventh-day Church Adventist member to even apply to go to medical school there. And he's a professor there. So
That guy,
at least
will it?
Walter
Walter,
Willett. Yeah. He works very closely with the Seventh Day Adventists,
he's a
doing
Harvard,
a lot.
big guy at
He's,
Harvard, right?
yeah, he's the grand poobah over at Harvard School of Public Health. Dr. Gardner, who's the Walter Willett of Stanford, he's been a vegan since the 1980s. Willett's a vegan as well. They're vegan activists who've just put themselves into these positions of power and now are abusing that power. And Gardner has been a vegan since the 80s, and I saw a quote that's someone said of him, so who knows, but they said that he didn't do it for health reasons, wasn't because like this was the healthiest thing. He just liked being a part of the vegan community. He just liked being a part of that whole movement. And it's like, okay. And so a lot of his studies are funded by, the processed food companies and Beyond Meat and all that sort of stuff.
Mhm.
It's highly suspect and corrupt sort of work, and it all ties back to the Seventh-day Adventists who are still pushing this stuff out. They founded a field of medicine, a specialty in medicine called lifestyle medicine. Anybody you know is a lifestyle medicine practitioner, they're automatically suspect because the curriculum for that was written by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It was founded by the Seventh-day Adventist Church at Loma Linda, and they wrote the curriculum, and they write the tests, and they do the accreditation for this program, and it's all about lifestyle, right? So change your diet, change your exercise. So eat less, move more, but really it's eat less meat,
Mhm.
move more. And so they're still pushing this vegan diet, this vegetarian diet. So it's not like this stopped in the 1800s. They are still harping on this. They're still beating the same dead horse about moving to a plant-based diet, and they've got a lot of vested interest in that as well. The Seventh-day Adventist Church they founded, like, I think over 20 different cereal companies themselves, including Sanitarium Foods, which is the number one cereal producer in all of Australia. And
Oh,
so, they're massive cereal producer.
does
It's
people
owned by the
ever
church.
do
Hmm?
people ever say that you're being funded by, the meat industry or
Yeah,
something?
big meat. Yeah. um, yeah, I mean, every now and then some idiot will say something like, "Oh, it just sounds like a shill for the meat lobby." Like, what meat lobby? Well, who's the big meat lobby,
You're
right?
you're
Yeah,
waiting for the
like,
checks to come in.
well, it's not even that. I mean, it's just like they don't exist, right? I
Yeah.
mean, who are we talking about? Like, what company are we talking? Big meat, you say big pharma, you say big food, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Nestle, um, Kellogg's, like General Mills. These are the ones, these are actually these big food companies that own most other food companies, and they're some part of this multi-trillion dollar cabal. And big pharma, Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, all these other sorts of things. You can name them, you can list them off. Who's big meat? Who is that?
Like
Where are they?
Swift or
I don't know.
Field or something like
I don't
those.
know. Are they like the size of those things? I don't know. I don't even know them. I guess maybe Tyson and
But they
Cargill
could
or something like that. But like,
but they probably are all owned by some of those other big
oh, it
companies.
could be. But the thing is that it's people are going to keep buying meat. I mean, it's just like that's you have to. So it's they don't need to like protect their interests or something like that. It's just they're not putting out a bunch of money. Dr. Baker actually tried to go to the Cattlemen's Association, which is like all like ranchers. They're all independent ranchers. There's just all like, and there's bigger ranchers and there's smaller ranchers, but they're privately owned. It's not like Bill Gates owns like 50,000 ranches or something like that. But the Cattlemen's Association sort of all the ranchers like pool in, and they pay for advertising, like those commercials back in like the 80s and 90s, the beef, it's what's for dinner, like that stuff. That's paid for by them, right? And so he's trying to help them all out. And so Dr. Baker said, hey, let's do some studies showing the benefits of eating more meat and just going on a carnivore diet, and like reversing autoimmunity, reversing diabetes, reversing all these other sorts of things, and improving health and by all these other metrics. He got nowhere with them. you know
Really?
they were just like, nah, no, we don't, we're not interested. And he's like, fuck, all right. And so they no, there is no big meat that's out there paying people for this sort of stuff. And apparently when Dr. Baker was on Joe Rogan, he mentioned that, and then some people sort of reached out and went, oh, hey, hold on a second, maybe you just didn't talk to the right person, or maybe they didn't know how much of reach that he had, and that he was serious. So maybe we're going to get something going, but you have to do this stuff independently. A lot of this stuff is independent, and we sort of push it out by word of mouth because it's not making the mainstream news. Coca-Cola puts out a study that says Coca-Cola is good for you, and then they pay millions of dollars to get the news stations to talk about it. Like, that's how
Yeah.
that works. So If you have a product at the end of the line, you can do that as part of your marketing budget.
And
But
focus
if you
on
don't, if you're
calories,
just doing,
on
yeah, if
focus
you're
on
just
the
doing
calories than the
Yeah, yeah. And so Coca-Cola and these sorts of things spend 11 times the amount of money on nutritional research than the NIH, the National Institutes of Health. So they're spending the vast majority of money on nutritional research. So the vast majority of nutritional research that comes out is completely suspect. And again, you don't need these stupid studies to tell you what to eat. You need to look at what humans have been eating since we've been humans. As long as humans have been breathing air and drinking water, we've been eating meat in either exclusion or near exclusion. And so why are we eating anything else? You know,
well,
we can
I
do
have one.
studies on it if you have to, but come on.
I just want to end kind of with like a pep talk, motivation. What if some people, have been doing carnivore a while, but they're just kind of tired of it? Maybe I'm sure you hear people getting just sick of meat. Is that just, where do they get that idea? And, just give us a little pep talk on why we should continue to be carnivore.
Well, the thing is that, people can say, well, I miss eating this, I miss eating that. And, maybe you miss drinking alcohol, smoking cigarettes, and doing meth. But, sometimes you just need to recognize that these things are not great for you just because they gave you a good experience or a pleasurable experience at the time. They're not good for you. And so I don't even look at those things as food anymore. I don't even consider eating them because I don't want to. I know what the difference is. I feel worse when I eat them. You eat a bunch of carbs, yeah, you're gonna jam up your blood sugar, and so you're gonna feel elated for a bit. You do a lot of coke, you're gonna get a big energy rush too. Does that mean that that's a good thing long term? No, of course not. And so you're gonna have a crash, you're gonna have a come down, you're gonna have other problems to your body that are going to be deleterious to your health. And so we it's not a great idea to treat food as a drug, which is what we're doing. We say, well, drugs and alcohol, drinking on the weekend, having some cigarettes. Well, I know it's bad for me, but I don't do it that often. And, maybe it's not all that bad. And I want the effect. I like drinking. I enjoy drinking. I'm tired of not drinking. It's boring to not drink. Okay, well, you can say that. But, your life sounds boring because, like if you have to drink because your life is so boring, then you should think about getting better hobbies and doing other things that entertain you. But that's what we do with food too, saying, okay, well, eating this way isn't good. Eating that cookie and that chocolate and even that nasty salad, those things are like, well, I want to do that and I enjoy eating that. I like eating that. And so, right, but that's harming you. It's doing something harmful to you. And so, it's, I like drinking. I enjoy drinking. I don't do it, more than I'm maybe once every 2 years, something like that. But I don't feel great for 3 weeks after that. I don't get hungover. I just don't feel good. I don't feel as energetic. I don't have energy. I'm tired. I don't have the same workouts. I don't feel great. And so something has to be worth me losing a month of feeling my best to to drink. And that just those things don't come up that often. So, if you the longer you do this and you focus on how you feel and you focus on your health, and you focus on the right things, it changes your mindset a lot. If you start thinking about this as just like, well, I'm bored of eating meat, I want to eat something exciting. It's just like, okay, well, that's the same argument that people use with alcohol and drugs. That you want that short-term gratification and you don't care about the long-term consequences. And well, it's not really like that. I can say that because I'm a doctor and I know what the hell I'm talking about. These things are harming you. And just because they're not getting you high like cocaine or heroin does, it does not mean that they're not damaging your body. And it does not mean, I mean, there are people the vast majority of people getting sick and dying in this world are not cocaine addicts. They're not alcoholics. They're people eating normal food that we're told is, yeah, it's good for you. It's fine. It's not meat. Meat's bad for you. We're not eating meat. We're eating this other stuff. And we become the fattest and sickest that human beings have ever been in human history. That's from eating food. That's not from doing drugs.
Yeah.
Right. And so we need to recognize how harmful this stuff is. And, sometimes if your body is telling you not to eat meat, it's not telling you not to eat meat. It's telling you not to eat. Meat will taste good if you're hungry. And so if you're just looking at a steak going like, oh, I couldn't even do that right now, don't eat. Have some water, go to bed.
Yeah.
And the next day, that same steak will look fantastic and it will taste better. So sometimes your body is just telling you not to eat. You don't need to eat every day necessarily if your body's telling you not to. You try to eat every day, but if it doesn't taste good and you're not enjoying it, don't eat something else. Don't eat,
Mm.
right? That's the thing. If your body's telling you like, oh God, meat, it should not be telling you that. It should be going like, oh, that looks amazing, and that's when you're actually hungry. It could be that you're just not hungry. So, there's a lot of different reasons why people go off. You have to sort of think about, you know, what's in it for you. Why are you doing this in the first place? Are you doing it just because it's trendy and other people are doing it, or are you doing it because you want to be as healthy as you possibly can be? Okay, if you're doing that and you're feeling better, you're losing weight, you're gaining health, your bloods are getting better, your testosterone is going up if you're a guy, your estrogen is balancing out if you're a woman, and all these different markers of health are all improving, then that's good. That's what you should focus on. And yes, you should enjoy the meat that you eat. And you can make it fun. You can eat all sorts of different meats. You can cook them in different ways. There are a lot of interesting recipes out there if you want to change it up in some sort of way. You can make bread out of crushed up pork rinds and egg and some butter, and it tastes like the best cornbread you'll ever have. You use this little, pork rind dinner roll, and that's something different. So you can do that if you want that. But then you'll find that it's a lot easier and nicer just to cook a steak and eat a steak. It's actually just really nice to do that, or cook a roast and eat a roast. But there are ways that you can change it up, but that's not why we eat. We don't eat for entertainment. We eat for nutrition, and if you stop treating food like a drug and you start treating it like nutrition and you enjoy it when you eat it, you will enjoy it. You will really enjoy it. I've never not enjoyed a steak
Yeah.
because I stop when I don't enjoy it, right? Because that means I'm not hungry. And I only eat when I'm hungry. And then I eat until it stops tasting good. And that's why I tell people to do that. That taste is a very key marker of whether you're hungry or not. And so that's the thing, you treat food for what it is, which is nutrition. You
That's
feel treat it to fuel your body. And if you're doing that and you're fueling your body and you feel amazing, you get to go out and do amazing things. You get to play sports in your 40s, in your 50s. You get to go to the gym, you get to be with your kids, your grandkids, you get to come out of a nursing home, you get to reverse your diabetes, come off your medications. People talk about, well, it's so restrictive, it's so boring, it's so hard to do it. And you know what? That's not wrong. It is hard. It is difficult for some people, but it's simple, it's straightforward, but it's not necessarily easy. But you know what's a lot harder? Diabetes. You know
yeah.
what's a lot harder? Alzheimer's, going to a nursing home, not being able to, not be, being incontinent, not being able to care for yourself or wash yourself and having to have someone wipe you. That's difficult. Having mental health issues, having major depression, being suicide, that's difficult. Having schizophrenia and hallucinating, that's difficult. Not being able to interpret the reality around you, that's difficult. Um, Autoimmunity, having 30 bouts of bloody diarrhea a day because of Crohn's disease and spending $6,000 a month on injections,
Mm.
that's difficult. There's nothing more difficult than that.
Yeah.
Being extremely overweight, having no energy, and not being there for your kids or your spouse, that's difficult. That's far more difficult than not having a ho ho,
Yeah.
right? And you get to eat steak every day, you know? So,
Yep.
that's the thing. We just need to change our perceptions and how we look at things, because the world is a very different place when you do that.
I like what you said about the hobby. You just need a little more interesting life if if the food is your entertainment. That makes a lot of sense. So, Dr.
Mm.
JP, tell everyone where they can find your work.
Yeah, well, thank you. So my YouTube channel and my podcast are my main things. My YouTube channel is just my name, Anthony Chaffee, MD, CHAFFE, and that's where I have a lot of videos and playlists. We call it Getting Started on Carnivore Diet. People want to sort of go through the sort of the short list on the ones I think are important are in there. And my Instagram is just Anthony Chaffee MD as well. And my podcast is just called The Plant Free MD, and that can be on Apple, Spotify, or anything else that people listen to podcasts on. And I have other social media, but you can all find that through YouTube and Instagram.
Awesome. Well, it's been so great talking to you. Please share, subscribe, leave a thumbs up, share this with a friend who might be helped by it. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.